So this acute coronary syndrome is a broad spectrum of disease starting from ST elevation myocardial infarction to non-ST elevation myocardial infarction and unstable angina. So what is this acute coronary syndrome? Just recollection of what I have told in the last time. As I already told you, this includes ST elevation myocardial infarction, non-ST elevation myocardial infarction, and unstable angina. Here, the patient presents with classical chest discomfort or an anginal equivalent, which I told you, at rest, and there will be ECG changes and positive markers of myocardial damage. A patient presenting with chest discomfort, which is typical of angina pectoris, which I already told you, along with ECG changes and positive biomarkers of necrosis. The most important biomarker is troponin. Based on this, they have been divided into ST elevation myocardial infarction, non-ST elevation myocardial infarction, and unstable angina. What is ST elevation myocardial infarction? Here, the patient classically presents with chest pain, and there will be ECG changes of ST elevation, ST segment elevation. This two is enough to say it is a case of ST elevation myocardial infarction. This is one of the acute coronary syndrome, which we have already discussed in the last class. Now, the same patient presenting with chest pain, at rest or the pain lasting for say more than 10 minutes, and no ST changes like ST elevation, wherein there will be biomarkers of necrosis like troponin elevation or another group of conditions which are called as non-ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. The difference here is there is no ST segment changes as in case of STEMI, which I told in the last class. Why you want to differentiate between these two is the treatment modality varies between STEMI and NSTEMI. Fibrinolysis, which is the treatment of choice, are primary PCA, whereas in case of STEMI, whereas in case of non-STEMI, fibrinolysis should not be done. That's why while you are doing a triage of the patient coming with chest pain, the first and foremost thing is take an ECG. If the ECG shows ST elevation myocardial infarction, this is an acute coronary syndrome STEMI. If it doesn't show ST elevation, it may be a non-STEMI or maybe an unstable angina or maybe other causes of chest pain, non-cardiac cause of chest pain. That has to be differentiated. So acute coronary syndrome, the term includes, it's a broad spectrum of conditions, starting from STEMI to non-STEMI, unstable angina, and of course, it also includes cardiogenic shock and sudden cardiac death. Last class I have covered STEMI. Today, in this class, I will cover non-STEMI and unstable angina. What is their approach? How to go for investigation. The basic pathophysiology in all the conditions is the plaque. Atherosclerosis is the most important pathophysiological mechanism by which all these things happen. See, if you see this figure, pointer. Right. If you see this, these are the macrophages laden with foam cells, and these are the T cells. These T cells will secrete interferon gamma, which decrease the synthesis of collagen fibrils. Whereas this macrophage laden with lipid is called as foam cells. They also secrete matrix metalloproteinases, which have also a negative metabolic effect on the collagen synthesis. So these two, in addition, they also secrete tissue, a procoagulant called as tissue factor is secreted by means of these macrophage cells. This lipid core of a atherosclerotic plaque is covered by means of a fibrous cap. This is the fibrous cap formed by means of the smooth muscle cells. See, these are the smooth muscle cells of the intima media, which I am showing here in the figure. They will generate this fiber. This is the fibrous cap. As long as the fibrous cap is strong, probably there is a growth of this plaque, and it can go for an eccentric or intrinsic growth leading to obstruction of the coronary vessel. With the activation of the T cells and macrophages, downregulation of the synthesis of collagen, the fibrinous cap may become weak and may rupture, that's triggering a thrombosis. When the fibrinous cap breaks, the lipid core of the plaque is highly thrombogenic material, in addition having a tissue factor procoagulant in the cells, whereas the blood also is having coagulation factor. So this will form a favorable milieu and it will start a thrombosis. So this is the basic pathophysiology of all coronary heart disease. So here what the difference between STEMI and non-STEMI is, in case of STEMI, because of the plaque rupture and generation of a thrombus, there is a total occlusion of the epicardial coronary vessel, resulting in infarction of the area supplied by the particular epicardial artery. So there is a total occlusion, thus producing a myocardial infarction. Whereas in the case of non-STEMI, there is only a subendocardial ischemia or infarction because the vessel is patent. Either the vessel is stenotic, obstructing the flow, or the thrombus is not completely occluding the epicardial coronary vessel. That's why there is a discrepancy. There is a difference. This is the difference between STEMI and non-STEMI. In case of STEMI, there is a total occlusion of the epicardial coronary vessel with a thrombus. Whereas in case of non-STEMI, it is only a partial obstruction, either with a thrombus or with an eccentric stenotic plaque. So STEMI is due to 100% occlusion of the infarct-related artery, whereas non-STEMI and unstable angina is due to severely stenotic but patent coronary. So this is the basic difference to remember. Or it may be a partially occluding thrombus limiting the blood flow. These are the two conditions which produces non-STEMI. Whereas in case of stable angina, chronic stable angina, which I told you in the previous class, there is no thrombus at all. It's only the plaque limiting the flow during exertion. Whereas in case of STEMI and non-STEMI, patient will have symptoms at rest. So this is the diagram you're able to see here. See, this is the plaque which has grown to such an extent that there is no thrombus here. The vessel is almost occluded except for some patency. And whereas here there is a minimal thrombus, but still the patency of the vessel. So it's a partially occluding thrombus here. You can see. So there is a partial occluding thrombus here. This is the coronary artery. This is the intima. So this is the thrombus. Still there is the patency of the vessel. Here also there is a patency. Here the plaque is obstructing the coronary artery, whereas here the plaque and thrombus are occluding, but definitely there is some source for blood supply. So in such a situation, if you take an ECG, unlike in the previous one, it will not show ST. This is the ST segment. You expect it to be elevated like this in case of complete occlusion. Whereas in case of non-ST segment elevation, there will not be ST segment elevation, or there may be ST segment depression and T wave inversion may be there. So this is in sharp contrast to ST segment elevation, whereas there is total closure of the occlusion of the epicardial coronary artery. Here there is a partial occlusion either by a stenotic plaque or by means of a partial thrombus, resulting in partially occluding the epicardial vessel, producing only either ST segment depression or T wave inversions. So in such a situation, the patient is having symptoms. You can also go for biomarker assessment. That which I will tell what biomarkers to see. If the biomarkers are increased, then this is a case of non-ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. This is how you triage the patients. So the difference between patients with and without ST segment elevation at presentation is very essential. I already told you, because if the patient is having ST segment elevation, you have to immediately either you have to thrombolize the patient, or if the facilities are available, you have to take him for primary PCI. Whereas in case of non-ST segment elevation, fibrinolytic therapy is harmful. So this important difference you should know. Important you should remember. That's why any patient presenting with chest pain, the basic thing is you have taken ECG. The ECG shows ST segment elevation. Probably this is a STEMI. It needs to be either immediately thrombolized or shifted for primary PCI if facilities are there. Whereas in case of non-STEMI, fibrinolysis should not be attempted. So same here it is again represented in this figure. Here it's also acute coronary syndrome. In ST segment elevation, see what happens. Last class I told you in ST segment elevation, if you leave the patient without doing any thrombolysis, this will go for transmural infarction, and ultimately the ST segments will come down and develop Q wave myocardial infarction. Whereas in case of non-ST segment elevation, it will not develop Q wave myocardial infarction most of the cases because it's only a subendocardial disease. That is the difference between QMI here. So STEMI patients will go for QMI, whereas NSTEMI patients mostly will not develop QMI because this is subendocardial limitation of the disease process. Then the clinical presentation, how the patients present. The patients present with typical onset of chest discomfort at rest. The discomfort, the pain already has been covered during chronic stable angina and STEMI. The same history, same risk factors apply here also. In physical examination, patient may show a silent, S1 may be muffled, there may be a third heart sound, fourth heart sound may be there, there may be pulmonary rales, peripheral vascular disease evidence may be there, evidence of atherosclerosis, all these things, evidence of hypertension, evidence of risk factors has to be searched in physical examination. As I already told you, ECG is the starting point for workup. So this is again the same representation. So ECG, what are the ECG changes of non-STEMI? Here there is ST segment depression or T wave inversion are the predominant changes of patient present with non-STEMI. If the STT change is completely resolved with sublingual triglyceride, for example, patient comes with chest pain, there is STT changes, ST segment depression and T wave inversion and ECG to give a sublingual nitroglycerin. Then the STT segment patient is relieved of pain and STT changes will resolve. This suggests a diagnosis of fringe metal angina. That's one possibility. I will tell the last what is fringe metal angina. The another possibility of this situation, clinical situation, is some of the patients with STEMI who have presented STEMI will undergo spontaneous reperfusion. That is spontaneous reperfusion of thrombotic occlusion. Without any drug also, nearly 1/3 of the STEMI patients will undergo spontaneous reperfusion. Suppose the another possibility is the patient who has undergone for spontaneous reperfusion will have STT changes may resolve. So these are the two possibilities. So fringe metal angina and spontaneous reperfusion of a STEMI patient is the possibility in a patient in whom STT changes will resolve with nitroglycerin. So this you must keep in mind. Then what are the things you do for risk stratification? So there are so many things. Myocardial necrosis, hemodynamic stress, the vascular damage, risk factors, atherosclerosis, the inflammation, all these things can be identified by means of some markers. Of these, the most important marker for diagnosis and prognostic estimation is a factor. It's called as troponins. They suggest the evidence. They are the evidence for myocardial necrosis. Whereas the BNP, NT-proBNP will suggest hemodynamic stress, vascular damage is damage by microalbumin and cystatin C, creatinine clearance. Inflammation is suggested by means of HSCRP, atherosclerosis by means of HbA1c and blood glucose. Of this, the most important marker is troponin. What is this troponin? See, cardiac troponins are a protein complex that regulates the contraction of cardiac muscle. They are specific for it. A cardiac troponin, there are three cardiac troponins, T, C, and I. C is not useful, and T and I are unique to cardiac myocytes. So cardiac troponin T, cardiac troponin I are very unique to cardiac myocytes. That's why they have specificity for diagnosis of myocardial disease. The method of doing this, there is a fourth generation assay and highly sensitive assay. There are two types of assay available. If the highly sensitive assay is available, this is accepted. A highly sensitive cardiac troponin T measured 2 times with 1 hour apart is very important, either to diagnose, rule out, or rule in the diagnosis of patients with acute coronary syndrome presenting with chest pain. So some patients comes with chest pain If the ECG is non-conclusive, if the HS cardiac troponin test is available, if it is first test is negative, you do after 1 hour, that also is negative. Probably this is the patient which is concerned with non-cardiac chest pain, and this is not a case of acute coronary syndrome. So that is the importance of this cardiac troponins. So what are the other use of this cardiac troponin? This is not only useful in confirming the diagnosis, as well as triad that I already told. As the patient comes to the emergency room, you take an ECG, you take a troponin test. Based on that, you can do. A ECG itself will decide whether it is STEMI or non-STEMI. Then myocardial necrosis factor is evident by means of cardiac troponins. If they are elevated, yes, it's a case of non-STEMI. If it's not elevated, ECG changes are there, probably it's a case of unstable angina. So, or if it's not elevated at 1 hour, 3 hours, and 6 hours also, a serial estimation of cardiac troponins is very useful to confidently rule out the diagnosis of acute coronary syndrome. Probably you have to search for non-cardiac causes of chest pain, like pericarditis, pleuritis, pleurisy, pulmonary embolism, aortic dissection, etc. This is the differential diagnosis of chest pain that I already told you in the first class when I am talking about angina, chronic angina. So for confirmation of diagnosis or for refuting the diagnosis, this is useful. Another thing is you measure it on the third day. If elevation is very high, probably it estimates the infarct size. And is also useful for risk stratification and assessing the prognosis. Elevated levels associated with increased mortality. So this is also useful in scores. There is what is called as a Gray score and TIMI score, which may not be useful for you, not necessary for you also. But these scores, for estimation of these scores, this is also considered. So elevations are useful for predicting the prognosis of the patient. So it's useful for confirming the diagnosis, for estimating the infarct size, for risk stratification, for assessing the prognosis. So if you measure after 3 to 4 days, the quantity measured will suggest as an index of infarct size. So these are I told you there are so many biomarkers previously. Now they are they are not advisable. Cardiac troponin I and T are the biomarkers of choice to identify myocardial necrosis, to distinguish between various ACS, NSTEMI and unstable angina. Elevations of more than 99th percentile of the normal range of the specific assay is used as a diagnostic method. If the highly sensitive troponin is less than 14 nanograms at 2 hours after presentation with chest pain or suitable clinical presentation, this is not a case of acute coronary syndrome. One can confidently tell about this. So that is the usefulness of this particular investigation. The limitation for this investigation is patients with kidney disease has reduced diagnostic accuracy, especially patient with heart failure, patient with respiratory failure, with myocarditis. In all these patients, there may be elevations. In these conditions, you have to go for serial estimation of troponins. If they increase more than 20% in serial estimation, probably this is considered as significant. And one more importance of these troponins is they are also associated with increased mortality in dialysis patients, critically ill patients, and pulmonary embolism in general population. So I already told you highly sensitive assays are more useful. So as soon as the patient presents to the emergency room, you have to measure troponins. Within 1 hour, you will get a report. If suppose that's negative, you have to report. I think you have to go for a serial estimation at 3 to 6 hours after the onset of symptoms. Beyond 6 hours, if the patient has no ECG changes, or no rise in troponins, probably this is a case of non-cardiac chest pain. If there is a rise and high-risk clinical features are there, then you have to go for further work. Then what are the other factors? Measurement of B-type natriuretic peptide may provide an additional prognostic information, because these natriuretic peptides rise in proportion to the degree of ventricular distension, strain. They correlate with risk of adverse events, including death, heart failure, and MI. So these have also, this BNP, N2 pro BNP is also having a prognostic information. Whereas HSCRP is also a marker of inflammation. It is also elevated in NSTEMI, ACS. The degree of elevation here also correlates with long-term coronary vascular outcomes. Previously, CKMB or myoglobin is used to be done a few years back. Now, measurement of CKMB and myoglobin is no longer recommended. Then, what are the workup for this patient? So, when the patient presents with chest pain, the EC size accessible depression TO inversion, the troponins are elevated. How do you approach for further workup for before going for a treatment? What is the non-invasive test you do? To identify definitely coronary artery disease, what is the goal of these tests? So now you know the diagnosis. Diagnosis an ACS because the EC shows no ST segment, it's a non-ST segment. If the enzymes or troponins are elevated, it is non-ST segment elevation MI. If the enzymes are not elevated and ECG shows ST segment depression, it is an unstable angina. In these conditions, what is your goal? Number one, to document coronary artery disease. So you have to do all tests to document coronary artery, like elevated cholesterol levels, risk factors like diabetes, hypertension, etc. Has to be familial incidence of sudden cardiac death. All these things has to be recorded. Then, to diagnose the coronary artery disease as the cause of raised troponin. For example, if the patient troponins are raised, to conclusively say that the raised troponins are because of coronary artery disease, that also you have to go for evaluation. Then you have to assess the extent of ischemia. You should be able to localize the territory before going for PCA and CABG. And you should assess the left ventricular function. So these are the things which you have to assess. What are the methods available for your SSR? Number one is stress ECG or treadmill test. The patient is asymptomatic, is not having any risk factors like LV dysfunction, etc. Patient may be, if the ECG is normal, patient may be subjected to treadmill test, if not otherwise contraindicated. Before stage 3 Bruce protocol, if the patient develops ST changes, this suggests probably it's a severe case of ACS, non-ST segment elevation MI. Or if the patient is not able to do treadmill test because of some mobility problem or maybe some other reason, same patient can be subjected to pharmacological test with the dobutamine. You can subject the patient to dobutamine stress by giving dobutamine and estimating echo, doing echo. Or else you can also do a nuclear scan using a nuclear pharmaceutical, what is called as stress myocardial perfusion. At rest as well as during stress, if you do, that will document the areas of underperfusion. Another non-invasive test is probably CCTA, that is CAT scan. This CAT scan, 64 slice CAT scan has been introduced. This is also non-invasive, quite costly test involving radiation. This also estimates the calcium score. This may also be useful, but with the availability of highly sensitive troponins for a triage, CCTA is not, the role of CCTA is debatable. CCTA is mainly useful in emergency room for triage the patients. If highly sensitive troponins are available, probably that is better than CCTA. Then once the patient is documented, identified having ACS, coronary syndromes, then you have to subject the patient for, you have to identify the patients for CAG, that is coronary angiogram. The another coronary angiogram, you know what is coronary angiogram? This is an interventional procedure where you will document by means of a radio opaque in a cath lab. You will identify where is the stenosis or thrombus or occlusional vessel, what is the arterial territory involved, you have to document. You can document by this method, and during this method you can also go for an interventions. This is done in a cath lab, it's an interventional procedure. The other latest modalities are intravascular ultrasound and optical coherence tomography. Just for completion's sake, these are two other tests which are available for documenting the obstruction or vessel disease of the vessels. So who are the patients with high risk? The patients who are hemodynamically stable, who are having cardiogenic shock, patients having recurrent discomfort, recurrent chest discomfort, refractory to medical therapy, life-threatening arrhythmias in the first 6 to 12 hours, or patient underwent cardiac arrest and when resuscitated, patient is having mechanical complications of myocardial infarction, patient present with acute heart failure, recurrent changes, ST changes, particularly with intermittent ST elevation. So these are the things which you should keep in mind. These are the high-risk group of patients in whom probably early intervention strategy is important. Then coming to the management. See, as soon as the patient has come reported to you, the diagnosis is made as a non-STEMI. The first thing is you have to give aspirin, 300 milligrams of aspirin. It's a non-entry coated aspirin, should be given, should be crushed in the mouth and should be chewed and swallowed. It should not be swallowed directly. So aspirin 300 milligrams should be chewed and swallowed. It's a non-entry coated preparation, should be given as an antiplatelet. Then the second antiplatelet has also been selected, preferably P2Y12 inhibitors like clopidogrel, ticagrelor, prasugrel. So how to select these? Usually the clopidogrel is the cheapest one. This also you start with 300 milligrams stratum followed by 75 milligrams. So dual antiplatelets has to be continued for at least 1 year. Aspirin 75 milligrams and clopidogrel 75 milligrams for maintenance. On the day one, at the first medical contact, you have to do 300 milligrams of aspirin with 300 milligrams of clopidogrel. In patients in whom the clopidogrel is having some genetic resistance in most of the population, nearly 30 to 40% of people are genetically resistant to clopidogrel, and cost considerations also become considered. Ticagrelor and prasugrel are rapidly acting drugs, quite costly drugs. That is a disadvantage. But in patients whom you are planning for an early interventions, probably ticagrelor and PCI are the prasugrel is the preferable drugs. Prasugrel should not be given age above 60 years, above 60 years, in people with less than 60 cases of weight and people more than 75 cases of weight. So prasugrel is not advisable because of the high bleeding risk in people less than 60 cases in weight, more than 75 years of age. Whereas ticagrelor can be given. It should be given as 180 milligrams BD on the day one, followed by 80 milligrams, 90 milligrams BD continuously for 1 year. It's a quite costly proposition. Then patient must be given absolute bed rest with a continuous monitoring. In ECG, one more thing I want to tell is the initial ECG may be sometimes normal because it may involve an arterial territory which will not be reflected in the surface quality ECG, especially in case of non-STEMI. When you get a repeatedly a normal ECG in case of non-STEMI, the patient is persistently complaining of chest pain. Then you have to go for an extension. So probably B3. Okay.
Roll number 68, Hemant, kindly mute yourself.
Kindly mute. Who is that? Hemant. Hemant, is it audible to you? Hemant, please respond. Dr. Hemant, please respond. Okay. So if the 12-lead ECG repeatedly shows a normal ECG, probably you have to extend the territory, probably V3R, V4R, or you have to go for V7, V8, V9 leads also, because the LCX, which is the important vessel, most commonly involved in case of non-STEMI, will not be reflected in case of surface 12-lead ECG. So that also you must keep in mind. So bed rest with the continuous ECG monitoring, clear liquid diet if early catheterization is planned. Suppose if the oxygen saturation of person is less than 90, then only you should administer oxygen, otherwise oxygen administration is not necessary. Then if the patient is persistently complaining of chest pain has to be controlled. If not contraindicated, all these drugs elaborately I told in the class, but nitrates can be given as sublingual or oral nitrates can be given or by means of a spray until pain is resolved, Or if the patient is hypertensive, you can go for 10 micrograms IV per minute infusion to a maximum of 200 micrograms, enhancing every minute. Or if the blood pressure comes, you must duly watch the blood pressure. If the blood pressure is coming down to less than 100 millimeters of mercury systolic, then this is the time to stop nitrates administration. So the pain may be relieved, especially the patient is having nitrates may be given for pain relief. If the pain is not relieved with the nitrates, then beta blockers are the second choice to add. In case of recurrent chest pain, if not otherwise contraindicated, beta blockers may be given. The contraindications for beta blockers, I told you, heart failure, block, bradycardia, reactive airway disease, peripheral vascular disease, already I told you in the last class. So beta blockers may be given. Beta blockers can be given either intravenously, if not contraindicated. 5 milligrams of metoclopramide IV may be repeated 3 times, duly watching his respiration as well as his pulse rate. Or else you can add within 24 hours the oral beta blocker, which is having no intrinsic symptomatic activity, preferably metoprolol. Tartrate can be given as 25 milligrams up to a maximum of 200 milligrams can be added and can be titrated. So you can start low and go during monitor his pulse pressure, pulse rate. So nitrates also will reduce his pain. Suppose the pain relief is not there with nitrates and beta blocker, as a third line drug, calcium channel blockers can be given. Calcium channel blockers have 2 classes of calcium channel blockers I told. Dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers should not be given because they cause reflex tachycardia and increase heart rate and cause hypertension. So non-dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers are the ones like verapamil and diltiazem can be preferred, provided the patient is not tolerating a beta blocker or patient is not getting response with nitrates and beta blockers. As a third line, you can add CC blockers. Then I already told you it's a dual antiplatelets. Then the important is antithrombotics. In this anticoagulants, you have to add anticoagulant. This anticoagulant, there is unfractionated heparin and low molecular heparins. The advantages and disadvantages of unfractionated heparin over low molecular heparin, I told you during STEMI. I don't want to repeat now. So here you can start low molecular heparins. Preferably you do enoxaparin, or you can do fondaparinux is one more drug which you can try. If the patient is being proposed for PCI, early PCI, you can also go in favor of G2 3A inhibitors like eptifibatide, tirofiban, and abciximab may be considered is another alternative. One more, bevacizumab is not advisable, not recommended for direct thrombin inhibitors. Bevacizumab, which I have discussed in STEMI, is not advisable for non-STEMI. So patient has to be given dual antiplatelets and an anticoagulant. This anticoagulant, parenteral anticoagulant has to continue for 1 week to 8 days until discharge. Then patient has to be maintained for at least 1 year dual antiplatelets. Then statins. High dose, high intensity statin, that is 80 milligrams of atorvastatin or 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin or parvastatin has to be given in all patients irrespective of their lipid levels. So any patient presenting with STEMI or non-STEMI, the indication is, this is an important indication to start because it's having pleiotropic effects. And of course, treatment of diabetes, other treatment of hypertension, the other symptomatic management has to be done. Treatment of heart failure. Then one more important is within 24 hours, if the left ventricular ejection fraction is low, you have to add AC inhibitors. If patient doesn't tolerate, you have to go for ARBs. The AC inhibitors, ARBs, the importance I told you in the last class. So beta blockers and AC inhibitors are having cardiac benefit, survival benefit. They have remodulating effect over the ventricular myocardium. That's why beta blockers and AC inhibitors or ARBs are indicated. They should preferably started within 24 hours and they should be titrated to the patient's need during watching the contraindications and side effects in patients. So beta blockers, AC inhibitors, statins, dual antiplatelets, and symptom limited exercise. Patient must be mobilized at the earliest. These are the 5 important things, and correction of risk factors. So long-term management includes continuation of dual antiplatelets. You can stop anticoagulants after 1 week. Then high intensity statins, Beta blockers and AC inhibitors, AC or ARBs, started preferably within 24 hours and up titrated. Symptom limited exercise, diet, and weight management, and management of risk factors. So these are the important things about long-term management. So this is an algorithm. This clearly will show. I think we can go through this. This is NST elevation, acute coronary syndrome. This is schema guided strategy wherein you want to continue dual antiplatelets and anticoagulant for a week. In dual antiplatelets, one is aspirin, next is P2Y12 inhibitor, maybe clopidogrel, ticagrelor, or prasugrel. Then maintain the patient like this. In the case of early, initiate dual antiplatelet, add an anticoagulant. Here, either enoxaparin or fondaparinux or bevaldrin is not considered here. Maybe G2 3A inhibitors are important. You can consider along with dual antiplatelets, you can consider either efzimumab, tirofiban, or eptifibatide. The patient is being shifted to early intervention strategy. Then based on the CAG reports, you have to go for either further approach like stenting, or you have to go for triple vessel disease or diffuse disease, you have to go for CAG. The same here. This is summary of pharmacotherapy. Oxygen administration should be only when the patient saturation is less than 90%. Pain relief, preferably by nitrates. Morphine has some contraindications and morphine is not available. Nitrates can be given sublingually until pain is relieved, or hypotension. The problem is it should not be given continuously for more than 24 hours. I told you the reason. Then add beta blockers as the second choice, either for pain relief as well as for they have survival feature, survival benefit. That's why beta blockers are early initiation of beta blockers are indicated, if not contraindicated, like low output state, shock, etc. Calcium channel blockers are the third line drugs. They are not the preferred drugs. If at all, if you want to do for patients whom pain management is not satisfactory with nitrates and beta blockers, calcium channel blockers can be given. They are non-dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers like verapamil and diltiazem should be given. Then antiplatelets, dual antiplatelets, aspirin plus P2Y12 inhibitors, anticoagulant, an intravenous anticoagulant if you are shifting the patient for PCI, or for 1 week you can give for an aspirin, duly observing the contraindications. For example, the patient is having CKD, you have to maintain the dose, you have to regulate the dose. Statins, high intensity statins, and AC inhibitors also should be added, especially if the patient is having heart failure and EF is low. The same. Then I told you about fringe meatal angina. See, this is a syndrome of ischemic type of chest pain. It occurs at rest, like coronary syndromes. It is associated with ST changes also. So it mimics non-ST segment elevation. But here there is no either obstruction or thrombus. To do a CAG or angiogram, there will be a focal spasm of epicardial coronary artery. For reasons not known, the incidence is coming down. One of the probable explanation is the hypercoagulability of the vascular smooth muscle due to adrenergic drive, or leukotrienes, or serotonins. All these things has been proposed to be the cause for fringe meatal angina. So transient ST segment elevation with rest pain, the very small elevations of highly sensitive troponins may occur here. So it's a transient ST segment elevation that disappears with time. If you do angiogram, there is a coronary spasm. The treatment here is pain relief by nitrates and calcium carbonate. Aspirin increases severity. This is what you should remember. So in fringe meatal angina, aspirin increases severity. Treatment pain relief is by means of nitrate and calcium channel blockers. Rest of the things symptomatically you have to continue. This is about, this may be a short note just to remember what is fringe meatal angina. What is unstable angina? I told you. Unstable angina, it is acute coronary syndrome where there is ST segment changes and there is no troponin. That is unstable. I think now I have covered STEMI, non-STEMI, fringe meatal angina, unstable angina. So complications of acute myocardial infarction will be the next.